kids are for?
Any sins pertaining to women, the topic, anything related to women. He quoted one of the Mishnayos in Mashirin, where it says that the liquid that comes from the eye purifies the liquids that come from the body, meaning pertaining to that type of sin. And this is this is stressed very, very much. That is just about the only item listed that acts as a tikkun for any sins committed whatsoever pertaining to women, because that's where the wording in the posek is, don't go after your eyes, and that pertains specifically to that sin, which begins with the eyes.
What do you say about medicine and pills? And listen, it's not considered Isra Achila?
It is. In other words, even items which normally are not considered royal achila, such as medicines, pills, in other words, they're not royal achilas kelev, a dog wouldn't eat them, even those items, which under certain circumstances, at certain times are permissible. When it comes to Yom Kippur, everything is forbidden. Any type of medicine, everything. 13, 100%, because of the fact we're trying to arouse again the Yud Gimel Midas Sharachman. If you recall, we mentioned on Shabbos 2 weeks ago the fact that the Arizal stresses specifically that that's the main concept of going to a mikveh. The wording in the Gemara for mikveh is merchatz, and the word beis hamerchatz, and the word merchatz is begematria 13 times Hashem's name, showing that mikveh pertains to arousing the Yud Gimel Midas Sharachman.
Because said that some allow children to fast a little bit out of chinuch, that was children under 9? Right,
100%. In other words, although the halacha seems to say that before 9 they shouldn't, in other words, from 9 on, the fact is that the minhag ha'olam is that even before 9 they allow kids, but with care, with tremendous care.
And either way, if she has an option, she
may
watch
Right, depending on her husband. And by the way, a reminder to everybody, it was mentioned it was mentioned now in the shir, I don't know if everybody caught it, that for small children, Rabbi Zal mentioned it on one of the halacha shirim that we have in the morning during the week, for small children from age 2 years old and up, it's very, very advisable on Yom Kippur night that the kids should be fed and put to sleep early, so that there's no reason in the world why a kid, even at age 2, can't be put to bed at 6 o'clock at night on Yom Kippur night, in which case a child at that age can get credit for fasting up to the morning. In other words, there shouldn't be any delay whatsoever in the morning meal. The breakfast, the bottle in the morning should be given at whatever the right time is. But at least to catch that much, that alone, Rabbi Zal said, gives a child a boost, a start, a tremendous haskalah in frumkeit, which could help out very, very much later on. Because according to how a child is trained at that age, that's what will determine how the child grows up. Yeah.
What is the between Asayim and Teshuva?
For in other words, certain items of pleasure or certain food items which a person should avoid during Asar Simei Tshuva, although during the year they are accepted to be permissible. For example, even those people who normally only drink Chalav Yisrael during the year, there are those who, although they stick to Chalav Yisrael, when it comes to items such as ta'aruvos, mixtures, such as a chocolate bar or ice cream or something like that, they do drink Chalav Akum. In other words, they would use Carvel or something like that. Even those people, generally, when it comes to Asar Simei Tshuva, they try to accept extra strictness in avoiding anything at all that's not Chalav Yisrael. That's one item. And secondly, when it comes to bread and cake, also, in other words, although during the year, let's say on Shabbos, we use only challahs that are baked in a Shona Shabbos bakery and everything. During the week, people use bagels or things like that. As long as it's not baked by a non-Shomer Shabbos Jew, if it's baked by a guy, as long as it's kosher, there's a hashgacha on it or something like that, it's considered acceptable without any problem. However, in Asar Simei Tshuva, we try to avoid anything baked by a guy, because...
What was the sin you mentioned in the very Hebrew word?
There were a few where he pointed that out. Kas was one. Kas is anger. A person who loses his temper. The Arizal quotes the posek. The Arizal says that the posek says, "Tereif nafshay bi'apoi." A person tears his soul with his anger. And the Arizal says that this is to be taken literally. A person has the power, by getting into kas, chas v'shalom, by losing control of his temper, a person has the power to literally tear the neshama in half. Imagine what kind of predicament that puts a person in. Chas v'shalom. Correct. The answer is, Rabbi Zal mentioned the end of a posek for which he didn't start the beginning. There's a posek in Navi which says, Mechaseh Shov lo yatzliach u'moida v'oizev Yerucham. A person who covers up his sins, who tries to cover up his sins, the Navi says that person will not succeed. U'moida, a person who confesses his sins, v'oizev, and he accepts to leave the sins, not to repeat them, Yerucham, that's a person who will arouse pity and compassion on the part of Hashem and be forgiven. And this is where the Shulchan Aruch and all these Sufrei Musa stress that this is where the importance of his Feiddus comes in. Especially when it comes to Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, Aseres Yemei Teshuva, a person should set aside a few minutes a day, a period of time during the day, to speak to Hashem in his own language, in English, to review in his own mind whatever sins the person can remember having done. For example, Rabbi Zal was talking about the Ashamnu. The Aleph refers to Achila. Any sins pertaining to Achila. Many times a person eats something, and he finds out 2 days later that item was treif or questionable or something like that. A person eats with a milchdik, a spoon in a fleshik, a pot, all kinds of things. Oops, it happened. It turns into a shiloh, but in any case there was a sin committed, whether it was accidental or not. A person should have in mind to spend time going beis bittul Torah. Each and every person knows how much more time he could have used for learning or for davening or for mitzvahs, time that he let go by. Gimel, Gaiva, all of those items, a person should set aside time to speak to Hashem, to confess his sins, literally, to speak to Hashem. Hashem, I committed this act. I realize now that it was very wrong. I could very easily have done without it, and I would have been much better off. And I would like to accept from here on in that I'll try my best never to commit this act again. And that's a person who gets his sins. There's a posek, K'chu imochem dvarim v'shuvu el Hashem. Take with you words and return to Hashem. What words? The words of vidui dvarim, confession. Yeah.
With regard to where you take the heart, it's very explained how why you take the heart and do something.
Yeah, it's not for now. He was explaining something al pi Kabbalah with the Chassadim, the fact that when a person commits sins, the Chassadim are related to a Menachem Mendel. It's not for now.
In the middle?
On the lower chest. In other words, the question here is the fact that all the Mefarshim, not by the bottom rib, but by the lower chest, all the Mefarshim in Shulchan Aruch generally bring the fact that you strike by the heart. That's what's known to people. What's considered a strange item here is that the Arizal uses the term chozeh, chest, which generally refers to upper chest. However, Rabbi Zal said if you'll check in the Pri Eitz Chaim, there's one place where he talks about this topic, and there he mentions the term leiv shebechozeh, the heart, which is by the chest area. So Rabbi Zal said that it would seem to imply that there's no contradiction here. The Arizal isn't arguing on anybody with regard to this topic. He's just applying the term chozeh related to that issue with siluk ha-chasodim, the chasodim going up to a makom sosim. That's a separate topic. But he was also referring to the heart, which is in the chest area. The only question is, we don't bang up here because the heart isn't up here. It's the lower chest on the left side. Okay, we have a little more to do on the other side. It's just that there isn't any other time before Yom Kippur to do it, so we'll finish it now. Question?
Considered the same as a chayla, person who is sick without sakana, and therefore she feels ill, and the Gemara says that we whisper in her ear, telling her that it is Yom Kippur. Many times this is sufficient to ease her pangs and hunger and make her feel better, because the hunger could be coming from the womb of the child who hears this. Plus the fact that she herself, by hearing this Musar, will be aroused to a stronger desire to overcome the ill feeling and the pangs of hunger. If this is not sufficient, then it is permitted to feed her or to feed any person who is a chayla, who is overcome with hunger, whose color of his face changes because of hunger, becomes violently ill, and the seder of feeding is to give them less than a kasevis, which means a little less than the size of an egg at a time, more than a kazayas, feed the size of a kazayas and beya, at a time, with the space of approximately 9 minutes in between each kazayas, each kasevis, and liquid less than a vis, also with the same space in between. In case of a chelish yeshbei saikona chas v'shalom, and then it is a mitzvah for everyone to feed this person, and it is absolutely asur for the chayil himself to machmir upon himself. As this heta pertains to food, and certainly so to medication, this complete heta requires no tshuva Yom Kippur for it. Of Yom Kippur, on the eve of Yom Kippur, before the shkia, we put on the talis, we make a bracha on it, satay patzitz, and we stop kol nidrei before the shkia too. Since it's like in the minute matin neder, and we do not do this at night, on Yom Tov, Shabbos and Yom Tov, therefore we have to do this before Yom Kippur begins. Actually, it isn't really matineh because the Ikir Kol Nidrei is said for the future. It's a tonight that if we ever make a neder during the year and we forget about this tonight, that neder is not chal. Actually, if a person makes a neder during the year and remembers that he said Kol Nidrei before, I mean, he's mevatel in his bottle tonight, the neder is chal. That's the purpose of Kol Nidrei. Before saying Kol Nidrei, we say Adas HaMochim, Adas HaKol, Onomatidin, Yispalim, Avayonim. This means that we make a special tonight, Yeshiva Shalmala, Yeshiva Shalmata, Kayach that we have a matir to combine together with our tefillas, the tefillas of the Rishonim, who wish to join us in Tefillah on Yom Kippur. This is a big Kiddush Hashem on the Rishonim on the Skarei. This is Allah and Yaakov on Kuchabrichu. B'chol, Yom Kippur is a kapora for everyone who is ma'amin, who has emunah in the koyach of Yom Kippur. One who does not believe in the koyach of Yom Kippur to forgive, meaning either he lacks emunah in Yom Kippur or he lacks emunah in himself. He feels that he is too far gone, too low to be zecher to a kapora, and he's fallen into yush. The person who has that yush, the him Yom Kippur does not help. Chas v'shalom. The person should be ma'amin b'emunah shleima that Yom Kippur is that much koyach and kedusha to forgive for everyone's sins. Kippur forgives not only for the chayim, for the living, but even for the mason too, unless the person during his lifetime was a rasha, gomor, then Yom Kippur does not help, except if he has a child, son or daughter who is good, then b'no mizaki abo, even that rasha's neshama too receives a kapora on Yom Kippur. In the morning, after Shachris, we learn the Tiyah in the Parshas Aharon that begins with the first sentence, the story of the Yistalkus of the two sons of Aharon, Nadav and Abihu, which means the Yistalkus of tzadikim. And the Gemara says the person who is inspired of Elisas and Aharon, the Yistalkus of tzadikim, and he can see his children live a long life. The Arizal says that it's very important that Chavin at the time to listen very carefully to the Kriya on Yom Kippur, to have it land very slowly at first posek, and to be zechet, related twice to shed tears then, which he is zechet to a mechila, slicha, and kapara for all his sins. During the saying of the piyut, saying of the biduyim, it is forbidden to a person, even the biggest Talmud Chacham, to learn Torah then. That is a time he can set everything aside and to join in the Tfilas HaTzibur, the saying of these piyutim. Of course, during the laning of the Estalkas B'nai Adain, above all, a person should do tshuva then, and say to himself, if this happens to such great tzaddikim, then what do we deserve? This thought will bring a person to complete tshuva. Also, the mitzvah of an aliyah of the Torah on Yom Kippur is so chashuv that a person should make every attempt to spend as much as he can afford to be zechet to get an aliyah on this Yom Kodesh V'Neila. After Musaf, though the Magen Avraham and Taz say that it's better to say En Kelekenu, the minig is not to say it. And for Mincha, we do not say Ashrei Volet Zion. We lay in the Torah. We say Ashrei Volet Zion before Nehila. For Mincha, we lay in the Torah. We lay in the Torah in Parshas Arayos. We have to take a flutter or a begun. And the Torah is Maftiyena. The reason we lay Maftiyena is to show the koyach, the power of tshuva, the edited person. This is so close to the end of Yom Kippur, his last chance to become completely, deeply aroused to tshuva. And also, we read that story to show that it's impossible for a person ever to flee from Hashem. Yena ben Amitai, Yena the son of, that is raised by, brought to life by Eliyahu Navi, that's why he's called Ben Amitai, who tried to flee from Hashem to avoid saying this Nevuah, and he was brought back against his will. It shows that it's impossible to ever flee. A person must, during his lifetime, be misaken any pagam that he has done. Safe calls safe. If he doesn't, Hashem will take it out on him, not to show him either Yom Haba or to bring him back to Yom again. So therefore there is no evading his duty, his mission in life. He brought back, as the enemy is brought back. The Vedic Kodesh says this deals with the neshama. The whole story is a mushal for the neshama. Therefore, it's best for a person, rather than to postpone it, and to receive the one was found the Yisurim and the Aishim, better now, while there is still time, to complete tshuva, to misaken himself while he can. This is the Musar of the Maftiyah. And then we have the Tfilas Ne'ilah, the closing Tfilah, final Tfilah of Yom Kippur, just before the Ilas Sha'arei Shemayim, where the heavenly gates are closed, and no person might feel very weak at that time, should strengthen himself with all of his power to put every last ounce of kavanah into this tefillah, to feel as though this is his last chance to receive life and a slicha mechila v'kapara. Think about how great this treasure is that he can cleanse himself of all his sins at this moment. So, fill himself with kayach and with simcha, and to arouse himself to the new power of voice, crying for forgiveness from Hashem. After the Ilah, we say together the Shema Yisrael, and at this point person should imagine the best of his ability. He is being placed before a firing squad or before Goyim who wish to kill him, and he says Shema Yisrael with a complete true Mesiras Nefesh for the sake of Emunah in Hashem. The person can imagine this perfectly, completely. He gets this schar as though he actually died for the sake of his religion. After the Arizal, we blow the shofar, and this is a symbol that the gates of heaven are closed. However, the fast is not over until after Ma'ariv and Havdalah. There's a question about making the bracha of the summon, and the minhag is that we do not say a bracha of the summon except if Yom Kippur comes out on Shabbos. There are some places where they are noting to fast 2 days Yom Kippur, but the place can say we have out this minhag since we are lucky. We know the calendar well enough now, and it's dangerous for a person to fast that much. When Yom Kippur is over, the person should go home with a deep feeling of simcha. The simcha brought upon by his emunah in the Kayach Yom Kippur, and the fact that he can now really begin a Haskola Chadasha, a new beginning in Avodas Hashem. His first act for Yom Kippur should be one of a mitzvah. The best mitzvah possible then is to begin the building of a sukkah. Sukkah is the gematria Amen. The gematria combination of the shigul of Yom Kippur K'Admi. That it's very fitting that after Yom Kippur is over, the next day is called Shem Hashem, to begin the building of the sukkah which combines the two names of Hashem. What a Hashem.
The list that Rosh Hashem would combine
because the word sukkah combines the name of Hashem. Yud Kei Vav Kei and all Chalot on Yud. What's the problem? No. Sure. You mentioned it on the Halacha Shirim in the morning.
This is about the best time to learn. It's one time, which is a very good time to very good time to learn.
Not to learn, to concentrate on the davening. Maybe
not to learn. During
Piyut, when they're saying the items that are said during Musaf and those items, there are certain people in different shuls that they don't want to bother with that. They'd rather learn something at that time.
Things that are said during
Exactly. It's like Shvachim to Hashem, like praises to Hashem. No, pirud. Pirud means machlekes. Always trying to fight.
Does that mean learning should be avoided during the davening?
No, it means at a time of davening, learning should be avoided. In other words, whenever there's anything to say...
Oh, in other words, during Chatzar
Exactly.
Okay, I see what you're saying. When you hear everybody go, join it.
How does Hashem judge sin? Like when you committed a sin against a fellow person, how does he judge it when that person has to think about it? In other words, that person had thought about what you had done against him, maybe he might forgive you, but it didn't come to his mind.
Well, put it this way, a person is responsible for whatever sins he can remember. A person should try to correct. In other words, even if another person might have forgotten about it, if you recall that you did a certain act against the person, if at all possible, it's advisable to go over to the person and ask him, I recall doing this and this thing. I'd like to ask you to forgive me for it, although you might have forgotten about it completely, if possible. What we do usually every single year, this was our minhag, that on Shabbos Shuvah, during the Shir, it's always mentioned the fact that everybody here accepts upon themselves to forgive anybody for anything they ever did wrong whatsoever to them, and assumes that everybody else does likewise.
And also, Rabbi said we should also mention that we forgive everybody in other times that we have been here.
Oh, okay, very good. Also another Gilgulim, to forgive anybody for anything they ever did. We say it every night before you go to sleep.
something about making a neder not call that whole thing over here. Like a person before he's not in neder right before Yom Kippur begins, and the Kol Nidrei does something additional.
In other words, he was stressing that the reason why we say that we start Kol Nidrei before it gets dark, before Yom Kippur starts, is because you're not committed to be Matir Neder on Yom Tov. Although you might want to say that Kol Nidrei isn't really Hataras Nedorim, because if you know what Hataras Nedorim is, Kol Nidrei, you're actually saying that I want to state now that any neder that I'll make in the future, not knowingly that I'll slip and I'll say a neder, I want to make it null and void from here on in. That's not really Hataras Nedorim, but since it's similar to Hataras Nedorim, therefore we avoid doing it on Yom Tov itself. Therefore we daven earlier, we put on it, and also another reason why we have to be in shul early on Erev Yom Kippur is putting on a talis in order to be sure that you're permitted to make a bracha. That's only before Shkia. Once Shkia comes, it's already questionable whether you're permitted to make a bracha on the big talis. Let's get the refreshments.
Sukkah. Immediately after Yom Kippur, we are Isaac in the building of the Sukkah. The Eliyahu Rabba and the name of the Medrash says that we do not make the Sukkah before Yom Kippur at all, because perhaps on Yom Kippur the Gzar Din came out that we are Chayev Golos Chas v'Shalom. So with the making of the Sukkah, going into the Sukkah, we get say with this English of Golos. There are Yeshinim who say that Adarabah, the contrary, it is better to build the Sukkah before Yom Kippur, to add this to our Schusim, so that we'll be able to come out pure on Yom Kippur. The Arizal says that we should make the walls of the Sukkah before Yom Kippur, and the Schach should be put on afterwards. Ayah says that in any event, immediately after Yom Kippur we should make the Sukkah, but we should complete the entire thing right after Yom Kippur, the Amitzah Yom Kippur. Chaim Talzal says that it is a mitzvah to give tzedakah Erev Sukkos, and it was his custom to distribute all the tzedakah he had amassed on Erev Sukkos, because then Rochel, as the Shechina, called Rochel, is Olos and Tzedek to tzedakah. Additional hay, that's an aliyah for the Shechina, and Tzedek is Malchus, the Shechina, and it goes up to tzedakah. Therefore, then is to give tzedakah, especially Erev Sukkos. On Sukkos, the mitzvah of Ushpizin, the 7 guests we have in the Sukkah during the 7 days, these Ushpizin stand for the 7 tzadikim, and they are the guests in the Sukkah. Guests means that we have to feed them, to give them part of the meal. This chelik of the Ushpizin, a person should give to the poor. He should invite Oichim to his Sukkah, because this is the cheshik, the desire of tzadikim is that the ani and the poor should eat their chelik. So therefore, it is a special mitzvah. The Zohar Kodesh says a person cannot be yitzur, the sudas yontev, unless he has aniyim, unless he has oichim on yontev. Especially on Sukkos with the Ushpizin, it's a special mitzvah to have the aniyim in the place of these Ushpizin, and then he knows that the Ushpizin are present and satisfied in his Sukkah. A Sukkah that is built underneath a roof, which means that there is an overhang over the top of the Sukkah, that Sukkah is possible even if the schach itself is kosher. If he completed the Sukkah with the schach, and then he first removed this overhang, then the Sukkah is kosher, and it is not called taseh v'lo min ha'osui, because the schach itself was made to kashrus. So just removing that overhang, which blocked the kashrus of the Sukkah, is sufficient. It is not required to remove the schach or to shake the schach up again. It is not taseh v'lo min ha'osui. A sheet that is hung underneath the schach, or anything that is hung underneath the schach, not for the sake of noi, but means to beautify the Sukkah, then that is possible, even though it is very close to the schach itself. Anything that is hung in the Sukkah for the sake of noi Sukkah, that is permissible only if it is within dalat tvachim, or 16 inches of the schach, even though this may cover the entire surface of the roof of the sukkah, by a schach. If it is more than 16 inches below the schach, then it is possible even though it's for the sake of noi. Midina, it's possible only if it's 16 inches wide. However, the minig, of the chumrah, even less than dalat tvachim, is also asur to sit under. Schach itself, in order to be kosher, requires three conditions. One, sameach min haaretz, has to grow from the ground, which means that earth itself, ground itself, is not kosher. Two, it must be polish, not supposed to be attached to the ground. And third, it should be ein mekabel tumah, something which cannot receive tumah. Two, you're not supposed to place on top of the schach to keep it down any item which is mekabel tumah, like a keli, like an item of metal. Only ordinary pieces of wood which are not kelim and not mekabel tumah. It is permissible to tighten the sukkah, strengthen the sukkah, to make the sukkah with nails, a sukkah that has walls made of boards, but nails made of iron, because the schach does not rest upon them. And therefore, though these nails might be mekabel tumah, still, since the schach does not rest upon them, it is permissible to use them. Boards as schach, less than dalat tvachim, are also, that is, even less than dalat tvachim, are also forbidden to use because of two gezeras. One, a gezeras tikna, that means we are afraid that this sukkah will no longer be called a sukkah, but a regular house. A house is made with boards. And secondly, because we are afraid that perhaps he might make them so close together that no rain will be able to come down. And a sukkah must be made so where rain could come in. However, b'shas chak, when there's nothing else to be used for schach, it is permissible to use boards even if these boards are dalat tvachim. However, it is a suffix whether a bracha can be said. If the boards are less than dalat tvachim wide, then b'shas chak, it is permissible to use them and to say a bracha on them. To place the schach on boards that are less than dalat tvachim is permissible. You have to have something to hold the schach up. You may use boards that are less than dalat tvachim because they are not mekabel tumah. The walls of the sukkah are kosher no matter what they are made of. If they're made of anything. However, the Bach says that they should not be made of anything which is pasul midaraisa. The Gra explains the reason, because we do not want to place schach on that which is pasul. Perhaps he might take from that and use that as schach too. The Yediyot Abba and the Chidozal write that there is no chash in this whatsoever. It is permissible to make the walls of anything. L'chatchila, the din is that the schach must be made in such manner whether it is loose enough to be able to see the stars through them. At the Chaim it says that the reason is because the stars are the shefa of the Chassidut. The Zohar Kodesh says that tzadikim nimshulu l'kechavim. The Zohar Halakia kechavim masidim. Tzadikim are like kechavim, which means that tzadikim too are the ones that are mashpia the Chassidut. So being close to a tzadik emes is the main source, the main mocker for receiving these Chassidut. The Shari Tshuva and Mishnah Brura, Moshe Feinstein say that with the Eved, if it's impossible to take off part of the schach, and the schach is so thick that not only can the stars not be seen, but even rain cannot come through, with the Eved it is kosher. The Chatchila though, the schach should be made loosely enough to have rain come through, and even to be able to see the stars through them. If there is schach pasul in the middle of the sukkah, across the entire length of the sukkah, and if it is 4 tefachim wide, this passes the whole sukkah, because it divides the sukkah right through the center, and you have only 2 walls on each side, which makes it a possible sukkah. If this schach pasel is on one side, the extreme side of the sukkah, then it is kosher until Dalad Amis, because we say, up till Dalad Amis, we say Deifen Akuma, that this schach is not actually the schach, it is the wall against which the schach is leaning. It's a bent wall, bent over onto the sukkah. But Deifen Akuma is kosher only until, up to, but not including Dalad Amis. If there is Dalad Amis of schach pasel on one side of the sukkah, it passes the sukkah. The Chatchila though, he should not sit beneath schach pasol unless it is less than 3 tvachim. Then he may sit underneath it too. Of course, the chatchila, it is better not to sit under any schach pasol, to select the place where the schach is entirely kosher. But that is still to have the entire schach of the sukkah kosher. In case of air or space on the roof of the sukkah, air, the width of gimel tvachim, passes the sukkah whether it is in the middle of the sukkah or whether it is on the side of the sukkah. Gimel tvachim is 12 inches. And you cannot sit under this open space at all, even if it is less than gimel tvachim, except for tiny holes, with tiny bits of space, which naturally is the nature of schach. That is not considered avir of the schach. A sukkah that is taller, higher than 20 ames is posek. Some say the reason is because then there is no shadow, no sail coming from the schach itself. In order for a sukkah to be kosher, for the schach to be kosher, you have to have more shade than sunlight. In case the sukkah is that tall, 20 ames, then you cannot have any sunlight in the sukkah, and the entire shade is formed because of the walls. In a case like this, according to this daya, if the sukkah was very wide, a half block wide, then even though it was 20 ames tall, you would still have sunlight coming in, and the shade would come to the schach. So according to this daya, there would be a case where 20 ames tall is kosher, and therefore we do not ask him like this daya. Another daya says the reason that 20 ames is possible is because a person's eyes do not look up that high. So a person would look only at the walls of the sukkah and not at the schach. Therefore, this daya says, according to this daya, if the walls reach the schach, which means the schach is not placed above the walls on stilts, for example, but the schach rests on the wall itself, mamish, the nature is that when a person looks at a wall, his eye sweeps up to the end or the top of that wall. In this case, then, if the schach rests upon the wall itself, according to this daya too, it would be kosher even though it was 20 ames tall. So we do not pass them like this daya either. The reason then that a sukkah 20 ames tall is possible is because of a gezeda, that if we build it this high, we would have to strengthen it and make it in the form of a house or a home like a didas keva. Now according to this, it would mean that if it is less than 20 ames tall and the walls are strengthened like a home, it should be possible. However, the din is that less than 20 ames is kosher even if it's a wall of solid stones, because it could be made a didas aderi. It could be made in a weaker manner. Whereas to build a 20 ames tall requires strengthening it, and there is no alternative, and therefore 20 ames tall is possible, whereas less than 20 ames is kosher no matter what kind of walls there are. The sheer size of a sukkah, minimum size, is zayin tvachim al zayin tvachim. 28 inches long, 28 inches wide. Now if the sukkah is not a square, then we have to measure it according to this area. So that if it is a round sukkah, it must be the size where you can form a square of zayin tvachim al zayin tvachim within it. This means that you have to have a sukkah, where the circumference, where a rope of 29 tvachim and 2/5 will encircle this sukkah. The reason is that anything which is zayin al zayin, and the alachsain, a square 7 by 7, the diagonal running across that square is 1 2/5 times the size of the length or width of that square. 1 2/5 of 7 is 9 4/5. Now this is the alachsain. Anything which is 1 tefach wide requires a chut of 3 tvachim to encircle it. Since the width of this alachsain, which now becomes the diameter of the circle, is 9 4/5 tvachim, therefore 3 times that is equals to 29 2/5 tvachim. So that the minimum size of a circular sukkah is 29 2/5 tvachim. The minimum height of a sukkah is 10 tvachim. Less than 10 tvachim is possible. Generally, in sukkah, we consider a tefach 4 inches. That the minimum height would be 40 inches, and this, of course, is naturally only the shas of chak. The din of eating in a sukkah requires only eating a achilas keva, which means a regular meal. It is permissible to eat an achilas arei outside of a sukkah, and this applies even to a Talmud Chacham, which means that though the Gemara says that anybody who does not drink even water outside of a sukkah is meshubach, is to be praised, if a Talmud Chacham does drink water outside of a sukkah, or achilas arei, meaning fruit outside of a sukkah, he is not considered a kal because of this. However, on the first day of Sukkot, since it is mid'araisa, it is advisable for a person to at least try to avoid eating or drinking anything outside of the sukkah, at least on that first day. The kriyas, there are many achrayim who hold that it is a sudas keva to actually sit down and eat a meal, and even a dairy meal, a light dairy meal, fish or cheese or so forth, is forbidden outside of the sukkah, except fruit. Only the Chai Adam is machmir in this, even in eating fruit. That is the keva. In all these cases of sudas keva, we are speaking about cases where no bread is eaten, naturally. If there is bread eaten, then it has a chiyuv of sukkah. If a person eats cake in the sukkah, if he eats more than a kebeya, then he should make a bracha leishev sukkah and sit in the sukkah for a while. This way he is yetzer, and he has kavona with the leishev sukkah to cover both the cake and the sitting in the sukkah. According to the Gemara, it is possible that there is a chiyuv to eat a meal in the sukkah every one of the 7 days of Sukkot. Since the Gemara holds that there is a chiyuv of achilas matzah on Pesach every one of the 7 days, it is possible that the Gemara holds the same thing true on Sukkot, that there is a chiyuv to eat in the sukkah each one of the 7 days. Since the Gemara says that sukkah is similar to achilas matzah, we learn the mitzvah of sukkah from Pesach. Therefore, a person should not eat on the first night of Sukkot until it is definitely dark, until it is vadai laila. So too, he must eat before chatzos, before midnight, the same as the chiyuv of matzah. Also, on the first day of Sukkot, he should not eat after 3 o'clock, in order to save his appetite to eat in the sukkah l'tei avain at night. The chiyuv of eating in the sukkah, the real chiyuv eating in the sukkah all 7 days, is only with bread that is the size of a kebeya, the size of an egg. Only the first night there is a chiyuv to eat when the bread is only the size of a kazayas, the size of an olive, because the first night is midaraisa. Therefore, al pidin, it is possible to avoid eating in the sukkah the entire 6 days after the first day, even on Shabbos. Because on Shabbos, a person could be yetzer the meal with a kazayas of challah, with the eved. And therefore, he could be eating outside of the sukkah. He wouldn't have the actual chiyuv of sukkah in the Sudas Shabbos. This, of course, is the halacha. The Maisa, naturally, a person should not try to avoid chas v'sholom the mitzvah of sukkah. On the contrary, he should strive for the sake of the zechiyah, the schus, of fulfilling this great mitzvah of sukkah, which is the gematria, the shiluv of the Shem Havaya Adna. If it rains on Sukkot, chas v'sholom, then he is better from the sukkah. However, if it rains chas v'sholom on the first night of Sukkot, then the din is that he should make kiddush in the sukkah and say the bracha shehachiyanu. Also, he should wash, make a maitzi, and eat a kazayas in the sukkah. And then he should complete his meal in his house, including benching after the meal. However, at the time when he washes for the meal, he should have kavanah in mind that he is going to eat in his house. In reference to the bracha leishev sukkah, though, there is a machlekes hapaiskim. Most of the shaynim hold that he should say the bracha leishev sukkah on the first night, though it is raining. Seems so too from the Ramah. Yishari Tshuva writes that in Chodesh he should say the bracha. But the Mishnah Brura, the Chai Adam, the Megader, the Kitzur Shulchan Aruch write that tzadik bracha is lahakel, and the bracha should not be said on the first night, unless if the rain stopped later in the middle of his meal, then he should go to the sukkah, eat a kazayas bread there, and say the bracha leishev sukkah. Now, though the Shari Tshuva is masik lahalacha, he brings out the halacha ladin, that a person who eats his suda the first night in the sukkah, the entire suda, though it is raining, that person is not considered going against the Gemara, which says that a person eating at a time of he should not say the bracha leshev sukkah unless the rains stop. Then he can eat a kazayas in the sukkah and say the bracha leshev sukkah. On the second night of sukkahs, if it is raining chas v'shalom, he should then make kiddush in his home. He should eat the meal in his home, and if the rain did not stop, he should go down to the sukkah, eat one kazayas of bread in the sukkah without the bracha leshev sukkah, and go back to his home and bench there. It is forbidden to feed a katan outside of the sukkah, that is, someone else's child. But if you see him eating outside of the sukkah, you don't have to stop him. By one's own child, it is a chiyuv upon the father to bring that child to the sukkah if the child is 5 years or older. He is not permitted to eat outside of the sukkah. The kiddush on sukkahs, they say there is first the kiddush, then the bracha leshev sukkah, and then the bracha shachyono. On the second night of sukkahs, according to the Beis Yosef, with Amor, the Bavush, the Eliyahu Rabba, the Chayadam, the Kitzur Shulchan Aruch, and the Emes with Iyun in the words of the Mishnah Brura, it seems that he too favors these poskim. And the second night, the din is that we say first the bracha shachyono, and then the bracha leshev sukkah. According to the Marshal, the Bach, the Rav Shulchan Aruch, the Pri Megadim, the Tesis Chaim, they hold that on the second night, again we say shachyono last. We are naeg, as the Minegadim is, which is like the Shulchan Aruch. But on the second night, shachyono first, and then leshev sukkah. According to the Rambam, the Kiddush is said standing, and at leshev sukkah, he sits down and says at leshev sukkah and shachyono. According to Ramor, the entire Kiddush is said sitting. But Arizal, it is niddah that the entire Kiddush is said standing. After the shachyono, after the Kiddush is completed, then you sit down to drink the wine. Ochais Dalet Minim, the lulav is basically Lamed Vav, Lamed Beis. Of course, it is brought that the lulav stands for the tzadik. Lulav is kapas timorim, tzadik katomor yifrach. Lamed Vav means the Lamed Vav tzadikim that are found in every day. The Lamed Beis stands for the Torah. In general, lulav itself is the gematria chayim, because the Torah is called Eitz Chayim. Torah and tzadik are the same, Tiberis and Yesod. The Lamed Beis is the first letter and last letter of the Torah. The Beis from the word Bereshis, the Lamed Le'eni Kol Yisrael. Together with the Esrei Begimatria Tov Bereish Yud, and the other three minim combined make it Taryag, to correspond to the Taryag mitzvahs of the Torah. The shear, the length of the lulav, the shedra, that is the spine of the lulav, before the leaves branch out, is 16 gudlim. That means 16 inches. The evet b'shas adchak, if the shedra is 13 1/3 inches long, then it is kosher. Less than that is possible. The shear of the hadas and arava is 12 inches. The evet b'shas adchak, 10 inches. Less than that is possible. If the tiyamis, that means the central leaf of the lulav, was divided, the tip was divided, then if it reaches down to the reiv, the majority of the length of that leaf, according to the gra, it is possible. According to the taz, it is possible if it goes down the length of a tepach, which means 4 inches. According to the Chai Adam, if it's divided even a mashahu, it's possible. This is only on the first day. The rest of the days of Sukkot, then it is kosher if it is divided up to a reiv. If the tip of the lulav was cut off, even the tiniest mashahu, then it is possible. However, the rest of the days of Sukkot, it is permissible to use that even with a bracha. On the first day too, b'shas chag, we can be semach on the gra, but if the tiemus was divided until a day, it also may be used. The hadas that was cut off, or the tip of the hadas was cut off, if it is the leaf that's cut off on top, then it is kosher the whole hadayas. But if the wooden part of the hadasim was cut off, was chopped off, the top, even the mashahu, according to the Ramban, the Rif, the Rosh, and the Ramban, it is kosher. But the Ravid says that in his Beis HaMedrash, they received a message, Baruch HaKodesh, which means through Kabbalah, that it is possible, and this is the halacha, even for one of the three hadasim. The tip is chopped off, it is possible. Same thing holds true with the arava. If the tip of the arava, meaning the wooden part of the arava, was miktam, it is possible. The hadasim have to be mishulashim, that means 3 leaves parallel to each other, at least the length of the leaf of the hadas. Since the hadas is 12 inches long, and it requires at least 7 inches of the length of the hadas to have them be mishulashim. These 7 inches may be all at the bottom of the hadas, lower part of the 12 inches, or at the top. In either case, if there is a reiv of the hadas mishulashim, it is kosher. The shear of the size of the esrog is at least kebeya, the size of an egg. If it is less than the size of an egg, the esrog is possible. There are days that now the eggs are niskatnu. Today's eggs are smaller than they used to be. Therefore, these days hold that the size of an esrog should be the size of 2 eggs today. A murkav, an esrog which is a hybrid, is not considered an esrog at all, and therefore is naturally possible. The mitzvah midaraisa by esrog is that it should be hadar, 3/8 hadar, and therefore if there are spots over the reiv of the esrog, the majority of the esrog, then that esrog is possible. If the spots are only in the miyat of the esrog, this is kosher. This is only on the lower part of the esrog. On the chaitim, that's the nose of the esrog, then even a kolshahu, any spot, makes it possible. This chaitim, this nose part of the esrog, according to the Rambam, means mamish directly under the pitam. However, the Reiv Paiskim Acharik, they hold that the chaitim means from the shipua. It means the upper part of the esrog where it slants sharply towards the pitam. This din of a spot on the chaitim being puzzle is only if it can easily be seen with the eye. But if it requires close examination, even though it is then seen, it is considered kosher. If a pitam is missing, that is, if it has broken off, then the esrog is still kosher. However, if the pitam is broken off, plus part of the wooden section in which the pitam rests, then it forms a hole, then the hatchila, this is possible. Same thing holds true with the ukis. That is the bottom part of the esrog. If around it, above the hole, part of the wood is missing, it is still kosher. But if sunken into this hole, part of that wood that the ukis is missing, it is possible. The color of an esrog is yellow or gold. An esrog that is green is kosher only if this is an esrog which in time will turn to gold. We can recognize whether this green esrog will become gold only if we see that part of it has begun to change to a yellowish color. If it is green entirely, it is a suffix whether this will ever change, but it is not kedai to use it. It is forbidden for an isha or a katan to bind the lulav, to make the knots on the lulav. This is only in the lower kesha, the kesha that binds the lulav with the hadasim and the aravas. The other 3 ksharim on top are permissible to be made by anyone. The top kesher should be made to allow at least a tefach of free movement to the top of the lulav. In other words, 4 inches of free space, which should not be bound, to allow for the na'anua. In the bracha, making the bracha, and in general during the na'anuim, one should hold a lulav with the shedra facing him, the spine of the lulav facing him. 3 hadasim to the right side, and 2 aravas to the left. The lulav should be held in the right hand, and the esrog in the left. The person who is left-handed should hold the lulav in his left hand and the esrog in his right. The Sfaradim hold that always, in all cases, the lulav is in the right, even if he is left-handed. Altogether, there should be 4 ksharim on the lulav. 1 on the bottom that binds the lulav together with the hadasim and aravais, and 3 above that, again leaving a tefach at the top of the lulav open. When he takes the lulav and esrog to bench for the Seder Nanuim, the Mechaber, the Yosef, the Shari Tshuva, and the Chayadim, the Tezvus Chaim say that he must take the lulav first in his hand and then the esrog. When he replaces them, when he's finished, he puts back the esrog first and then the lulav. In that case, is he allowed to hold the lulav and the esrog in the same hand? If he does so, he's not yetzi with the brachos or the nanuim. He must use both hands. He should see to it, of course, that when he holds them, they should touch. The esrog should touch the lulav when he holds them with both hands, because they stand for the 4 Isiyas, the 4 letters of Hashem's name. He should not cause any kiruv chas v'shalom. So too, should a person take off any rings or any kind of chatzitza from the hands, there should be no chatzitza between the hands and the lulav and esrog. The Seder Avina Anuim, according to the Arizal says first that the bracha on the lulav and esrog a person should make in the sukkah, not in the shul. Seder Avina Anuim, the order is, according to the Arizal, Darim, Safain, Mizrach, Mala, Masha, Marav, which means when he faces the Aron Kodesh, if it is east, then they say there would be right and left and forward and up and down and back. In doing it to Marav, or the back, he does not turn around to face the Marav. He stands facing Mizrach and shakes it to Marav over his shoulder, over the right shoulder. The person should be medakdek very much in the morning to carry the dalad minim with him to shul. And in going home, he should take them with him also back from shul. This is the inyan of the tzachon, or victory, the Zayda Kodesh speaks about. The mitzvah of holding proudly and going through the streets with the lulav and esrog. A person should not leave the lulav and esrog over in shul overnight. Also, he should not eat before the tilas lulav any day. It is compulsory for a katan to have a lulav and esrog too. It is the duty of a father to buy a katan, a lulav and esrog. On Yom Tov, it is permissible to place the lulav back into the water to keep it fresh, or the wet towel, and even to add water to it. On Chol HaMoed, it is a mitzvah to change that water to freshen it. The mitzvah too, to renew the arava, to put new aravas into the lulav every day. When we speak about Hebrew mitzvah ad shlish, when a person does a mitzvah, he should spend up to 1/3 more for that mitzvah. The Gemara uses the mitzvah of esrog as an example. Arizal says that there is a secret in this, and how wise are the Jews that they recognize the beauty and importance of the mitzvah of esrog. People go so far, to such extent, in expending themselves and spending more for an esrog which is a hadar. So a person should not skim chas v'shalom when it comes to this mitzvah, rather to strive, spend as much as possible for the best esrog possible. One who invests in an esrog can be assured that there is a lot of dividends, a lot of schar in Hashemayim for it. And a dalad minim, the Torah says, that means that you must use your own lulav and esrog, one that you own. Therefore, a person who doesn't have one and has to borrow one should see to it that it should be given to him as a complete matana amanas lahachsiyah, and thereby he could fulfill the mitzvah of lachem. This is only on the first day when it is midaraisa. The rest of the week it is not necessary. And therefore, on the first day, it is difficult to do this with a katan, because a katan cannot be matna. He can receive, he can never give back this matana. Therefore, it is best for a katan to have his own. Also, since this must be mishalachem, a person should be careful to have the lulav and esrog paid for completely before Yom Tov, so that it is completely his. So too, in buying the Haishanis for Haishana Rabba, or Aravos during the week, you should see to it that they are completely paid for in advance. Every day, when we say the Haishanis, after Hallel, we take out the Seder Torah, and we walk around the bima once in saying the Haishanis, holding the lulav and the esrog. On Haishana Rabba, we take out a Seder Torah, we walk around 7 times, 7 hakafos around the bima. On Shabbos, we do not take out a Sefer Torah. We just open the Aron Kodesh and say the Hashanos without taking it out of Sefer Torah, without walking around the bima, since we do not have any lulav and esrog on Shabbos. 29 of Hashanah Rabbah, it is a mitzvah to stay up. But more important, the Arizal says, is the mitzvah to say Tikkun, which consists of saying the entire Chumash Devarim, the last Seder of the Zois HaBracha, to say Shnayim Mikra V'Echad Targum, the Haftarah, first parak in Yeshua, and then the entire Tillim with the special Yehidot signs after each Sefer Tillim. Hashanah Rabbah itself is considered the Gemar Hadin, and therefore, in a sense, it resembles Yom Kippur. There are many differences in Halacha, of course. In order to be Arvev the Satan, the davening is strange, different than regular davening of Yom Tov or Yom Noraim. But there are parts of the Tefillah that resemble the Yom Noraim. Ikad is that on Hashanah Rabbah, a person should realize this is the final chance for Teshuva. If a person missed the chance of doing Teshuva during Aseres Yemei Teshuva, the Piskin, that means a decision in heaven, the Gzeres are held up until Hashanah Rabbah, giving the person an additional opportunity for Teshuva. And therefore this night and this day is set aside for a final Teshuva being called the Gemar Hadin. That is why a person should rise, get up earlier to come to Shul, to do the mitzvahs that pertain to Hashanah Rabbah with Kavanah, and to put much more Kavanah into his davening on this day. Seder HaTefillah is, Haidu, is the same as Shabbos. The brakim of Tillim that are said on Shabbos between Haidu and Baruch Shana are added on Hashanah Rabbah. The Chazan wears a kippur then. Starting with Baruch Shana, he reverts back to the regular weekday davening, saying Mizmor Seder, Yishtabach, without saying Nishmas. After Yishtabach, Shir HaMalais Mima Amakim. And then the regular davening, regular Shachas, as in Chayil HaMayim. For the Hashanis, after Hallel, the Seder is 7 Hakafas for the Hashanis. When the Hakafas are completed, he puts aside the Lulav and Esrog completely, and then first takes the Hashanis into his hands. The person cannot hold the Lulav and the Hashanis together at the same time, according to the Arizal. When the Hashanis are over, according to the Arizal, he's supposed to beat the Hashanis on the ground only, exactly 5 times and no more. The Musaf is the Musaf of Yom Tov, saying a long Keser with Adir Adireno at the end. So after Musaf, he should consider it like Yom Tov, and he should be careful with the mitzvah of Muktzah and other Hilchis Yom Tov until Musaf is completed. During every one of the nights and days of Chol HaMoed, you should try to see to what they eat in the sukkah to fulfill the mitzvah of the Yoshpizim. And especially, above all, the Simchas Beis She'eva of the second day of Chol HaMoed Sukkos, the Hilula of Rabbeinu Zal, Nachal Neveh Mekach Chachma, Zchusu Yorei Kol Yisrael Amen. The Hilula comes out on the 4th day of Sukkos, which is the Yoshpizim of Moshe Rabbeinu, the Tzadik Emes. The 4th day is the Sfira of Netzach, which is the Gematria Rabbeinu Zal, Zchusu Yorei Amen. The person attending that Yoshpizim is in that manner Mekasher himself more strongly to the Neshama of Rabbeinu Zal and can be assured of the brachos and the tikkun that he can receive from the Rabbeinu HaKadosh. Amen. Amen.
There's someone with the same.